Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to High Top Sports Oregon. I am Cody the Professor. We got Derek the Duck, the champ. But first, I want to thank our proud sponsor, BetUS. Go ahead, check them out, betus.com for all your gambling needs. All right, Derek, Big Ten champion, how's it feeling? Before we break this thing down, first time ever Big Ten champion, and probably one of the only times in history that a team goes into a new conference and wins it. I don't hold me to that, but it's very rare.
Yeah, it is. It's obviously really satisfying, being one for one in a conference like the Big Ten, especially when the whole narrative on the offseason was teams from the West Coast aren't going to be able to compete in the Big Ten physically. They're not built for the Big Ten style of play. What else were we hearing? The fact that like they get worn out, they can't sustain that type of offense all throughout the year.
Line of
The defense
scrimmage.
will eventually crack, and I Right, yeah, they won't be able to dominate the line of scrimmage. Offensive line won't hold, defensive line won't be able to get pressure. Um, and if we're taking a look at the year as a whole, all of that could not be farther from the truth. I would say in the vast majority, if not all of the games, Oregon definitely looked like the more physical team. Last night was an exception. That didn't always look to be the case. However, it's kind of like we were talking about a little bit ago. It's one of those things when you put it into perspective where, we arguably saw the worst defensive game Oregon's played since the Boise State game, and they still won by 8+ points, in Big Ten country against the number three team in the nation. So, I understand there's some concern, but I feel really good coming out of last night's game, honestly.
Yeah. Before we really dive into the game, it was a fun game. I think it, it was Big Ten esque. A lot of running the ball. A lot of work to the tight ends, which is, I mean, that's Big Ten football, right? 3 yards of cloud of dust, and then drop it off to the tight end. And boy, did they have a good one in number 44. Tyler Warren, he's pretty darn good. But Oregon had some magic at the tight end with Kenyon Sadiq with 2 touchdowns. I think that might be a game record for him. 2 touchdowns, not a bunch of yards, but scored. Had a hurdle that was pretty sweet. But definitely a Big Ten matchup. I said it. I think I texted you this. Oregon is what Ohio State wants to be. Um, they can run the ball between the tackles with James and Noah Whittington, and they can out physical you, but they also can air it out. They're exactly what Ohio State wants to be. On defense, Oregon did show some cracks. We'll get into that. But overall, I think it's a very good team and a good year so far. And they move in. They get the bye, which is big. Get some guys healthy after that absolute brutal slugfest with Penn State because it was physical. It was a very physical game. But let's go ahead and talk about that real fast. So, 45-37, Oregon gets the win over Penn State. Let's go ahead and check out some of the stuff real fast. So,
All right.
Penn State kind of showed some cracks with the Oregon defense. Ran the ball extremely well, 200 yards, 200 plus yards between the two backs, and then Aller had 54 yards himself. How do you feeling about that? If there was some cracks, it showed with that Oregon defense at the line of scrimmage and linebacker level with the run game.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, coming into this game, I think we all kind of knew this was going to be one of the most physical games that Oregon has played yet this year. Clumping in that Ohio State game with these guys here, just because of what Penn State is able to bring in the trenches on both sides of the ball. And I think that's kind of what we saw the product of last night. The defensive line was, I don't want to say a non-factor. I think there was one sack on the night last night, but we weren't seeing a ton of consistent pressures. It seemed to be they were getting really pushed around up front on a lot of these run plays where, they were chunking off 8, 10, 12 yards a run, but it seemed like, multiple times a drive, which gets really hard to, sustain as a defense there. But it's kind of one of those bend but don't break things. It's they obviously gave up a ton of points, but at the same time, it never really felt like Oregon was in true danger of losing that game in the second half. They understood how the offense was moving the ball. They understood how they wanted to kind of carry them and momentum and deal with the time management situation. Um, given the fact that the defense was struggling. And Dan talked about it, how the offense was able to bail the defense out last night. Mateo, in his post game presser, he talked about the same thing where he's like, I'm grateful we have an offense to be able to, pick our backs up when we don't have play our best game. So we know from this year, this isn't who Oregon is. We saw this is a tough game against a tough opponent on a tough stage. It's one of 13 games, and as we know, it's really hard to play 13 really, really complete, solid games. And Oregon didn't bring that last night. But, silver lining is they were able to walk away with a W and, win the Big Ten championship in their first year in the conference and secure that number one seed in the playoffs.
For sure. Tez Johnson has a wild night, 11 catches, 181 yards, 16 and a half average, and one touchdown along a 48. The long of 48, don't get crazy. It was a shallow crosser that he broke for a long one over the top, over the safety. But, kind of again, an anomaly. Oregon never tests Penn State deep, which is kind of a head scratcher. You have the weapons outside. And, another thing is some drops. Trayshawn Holden had a drop. There was multiple drops. Ferguson had a drop or two. Uncharacteristic of this Oregon wide receiver core.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the wide receiver core, I think last night a lot of people expected Evan Stewart to be a factor, especially given kind of the Oregon game plan. One of the things we were talking about previously was the fact that Oregon, they tried that bubble screen play. I mean, I bet you we saw it no less than
Times.
6, 8 times
Yeah,
last night, right? And usually when you're doing that, one of the times you're going to try to go on a double move, take a shot, and that's kind of where your Evan Stewart tends to come into play, or even your Trayshawn Holden's come into play. Um, and that just it never felt like the case. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember a true deep shot taken last night to really test that coverage. And if they did, the fact that we can't think of it off the top of my head tells me, they were very content trying to get the ball in the playmakers' hands out in space and just letting them navigate that way. And can't really knock it too much at the same time, just because they still put up 45 points last night. I'm never going to complain when you put up 45 points on a really physical defense. So it's the give and the take. It's I don't think on either side of the ball Oregon was perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Like obviously the defense had their glaring holes, but I don't think the offense was quite clicking to the caliber they could be yet. And I think that speaks volumes as to where Oregon can continue to go if they do play whole games.
for sure, for sure. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of gambling real fast, and then we are going to break down what the offense did, Dylan Gabriel and Drew Aller, and how it never really felt out of control for Oregon. But let's go ahead, check out betus.com. At betus.com, use the code YouTube150, get 150% back on your first deposit, 125 on your second deposit, up to $2,000. That's 150% back on your first deposit, 125 on your second deposit, up to $2,000 with the code YouTube150. Let's go ahead, check out the old great game, Northwest Stadium, Landover, Maryland, the Army Navy game. Navy's getting six points, total of 40 and a half. I'm going to go ahead, bang the over, and then I'm going to take Army money line.
I like it. I think the Army Navy game, this is one where it's gone under like I think a stupid percentage of the time that Vegas releases a line. Like I'm talking like 13 out of the last 15 games have went the under or something like that. Um, I do think they're going to go over here. This is a different Army offense that we're seeing. Even Navy early on in the season, we were able to see what they were able to do on offense. It isn't the typical, you don't have the ability to test the ball down the field. Both of these teams do this year. And Army, their offense looks completely different.
Yeah.
And they, just blew out, I believe, Tulane in the American Conference Championship. So Army's coming in hot. I'm going to take Army. Shout out to my brother in Korea. He's in the Army, so, got to roll with him. I think Army wins this one pretty handily.
Gotcha. Love this game. It's always a fun one. And glad to see some offensive firepower. It's not just going to be running the veer or whatever they run, triple option of pass. The service academies have kind of stepped up a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and break down the quarterbacks real fast. Dylan Gabriel, 22 of 32, 283, 8.8 yards average. That's about typical for him. 4 touchdowns, QBR rating at 95.4. Always felt in control. No INTs. Nothing bad happened. Scrambled a little bit when he needed to. It was a one of the better games from Dylan Gabriel. Just does his job. It's not always flashy. It's not 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, but does his job well in that Will Stein offense.
I think you put it perfectly. Dylan Gabriel's game. I think if you look back on the game last night, you don't watch it and you automatically think you're like, wow, Dylan Gabriel let the line on or let the world on fire. And then all of a sudden, you kind of check the stat line and he was very efficient with the ball. Obviously you talked about averaging 8 yards a throw, and that's just kind of the Will Stein offense that we run. We saw it last year with Bo Nix. Same song and dance this year. 4 touchdowns. He was able to find his playmakers in space. He, like I said, never really put the ball in danger, no turnovers. So Dylan Gabriel played the exact game that we needed him last night. We didn't need him to throw for 400 yards. That's not how the offense functions. That's not what we needed. And I'm glad he doesn't feel like he has to force it to win the game. Even when the run game was struggling a little bit, they never really felt like they gave up on it. Dylan didn't feel like he was trying to force the ball downfield. I mean, obviously, we were talking about how they were lacking on the deep shots last night. But yeah, very efficient. And I think if we can get this Dylan Gabriel in the college football playoff, regardless of who we're lining up against, I'm going to feel really good about our chances.
And then probably the reason why we talk about the defense didn't have a great game, but boy, 2 INTs, one of them a pick six. And so the defense did do their job. They did give up 37, but they also put 7 points on the board against Drew Aller.
Yeah, they did. Right. Dante Manning, he did fall a yard short of the pick six. He was almost there, stretched, didn't quite reach the goal line, but yeah, really close to a pick six and a touch or turnover inside their own 30. And obviously the Nico Reed interception was, you could not have played that ball any better, turned around and kind of made that over the shoulder basket catch as a defender going the other way, heading toward the hash is a pretty impressive catch for any nickel to play. But that's just what we've come to expect out of him this year. He's someone who he was able to contribute his last few years in Eugene, but this year he's been a staple of that defense. And I think, I don't know if Oregon's sitting here at 13-0 if we don't have Nico Reed playing to the level he has been all year, let alone what he was able to do to seal the game last night.
For sure. Yes, close pick six. Georgia had a pick six last night. That's what I was thinking of. So watch a lot of college football, and you don't see too many of those pick sixes. But yeah. So held Drew Aller 226 yards, 20 of 30. He did have 3 touchdowns, but 2 INTs. So it's kind of tough to say the defense. They stepped up when they needed to. It seemed like they weren't perfect. I wish they could have put the cap on Tyler Warren. 7 receptions, 84 yards, and people are like, that's not great. That's average. But the 7 receptions were always, it seemed like, so crucial. Third downs, fourth and 2. I mean, he was the guy to go to when they needed him, and he was sure-handed. He did have 1 fumble yesterday, but it felt like, man, they're kind of a one-trick pony. Can we stop Warren and then shut down the run game? But it seemed like he would just always open.
It is. And it's, there's a couple throws I can think of where he was double covered and it didn't matter. For
Yep.
one Drew Aller, I think Drew Aller played a hell of a game, regardless of how the Oregon defense was playing. He played very efficiently last night. And was able to make big plays when he needed to on big downs. And, a big part of that was Tyler Warren. And it feels like he's open regardless of, whether he's double covered, whether you put a safety, a nickel, a linebacker, it doesn't matter. It feels like he's always open. He's just, that talented out of that position. And you can only say so much about it. He's going to be a first round tight end come, the spring here. But like you said, it did feel like a one trick pony the entire time. I would feel confident again if we lined up against Penn State coming again this weekend. It felt like if Oregon was able to, even be a shell of their normal run defense, I don't think this game is particularly close. They don't quite have the wide receivers to match up with the talent of the cornerbacks. I think the one mismatch they did have was obviously Tyler Warren because, you can't really put a linebacker on them. They don't really have the coverage skills like that. Even the nickels, they're at a size disadvantage given the speed that he has and, his
Yeah.
catch radius. And and then if you put a safety on him, you kind of open yourself over the top. So it's really, really difficult to defend him. But like I said, I don't think this game is particularly close. If they could, cut Penn State's run yards in half, if they gave up 170 yards on the ground, I still think Oregon wins this game by 2 to 3 scores.
Yeah, so 297 on the ground. Two very, very good backs in Allen and Singleton. We knew that coming from the get go. Not a great night for that rush defense. I think I'm going to tell you this. I think Penn State had just enough juice to keep them on their toes with Warren. I think that they were kind of perplexed in the personnel aspect. They rolled a safety over to him, then he just mossed him. They put Reed on him, Nico Reed. He makes him look silly. They rolled the linebacker over to him a couple times. That kind of seemed to work for a little bit, but it just seemed like, listen, sometimes those guys are just gonna get theirs, and you gotta manage them. They're gonna get their catches, their 84 yards and a touchdown or two, but it's everybody else that you can't let open up, and that's what happened last night was
Mhm.
letting Allen and Singleton open up because they were so worried about what Tyler Warren was doing. I think that's kind of where it hurt the defense a little bit.
100%. And I think what Penn State did a really good job of was kind of using a lot of exotic packages to ensure Tyler Warren gets favorable matchups. The two plays I can think of, there was a point last night where they kicked a tackle out to the outside, put him in a trips package on the left side and put line Tyler Warren up in that tackle position, and obviously that created a headache. And you could see during the replay, you could see the confusion and the safety and the linebacker were trying to communicate to figure out who was going to guard him. And lo and behold, he found the biggest soft spot in the defense humanly possible because you don't have a set guy to defend the tackle coming out of coming off the line. So that's interesting. And, when they tried the 2 point conversion, they tried the old Philly special play from the Eagles a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl. And then, I can think of there's a couple of fourth and short plays where they lined him Tyler Warren up under center. That
Yep.
created some issues for Oregon. They lined him up as a fullback. They lined him up in this tight end position. They split him out wide. They put him in the slot. So they did a really good job, trying to keep the Oregon defense on their toes so they couldn't sit in one particular package. And, they were finding ways to get him favorable matchups. And even when they weren't feeding him the ball, he only had 7 receptions for 84 yards, but you could tell the entire night that Tasha's defense was heavily focused on him. And that really allowed for those two running backs to do a lot of damage on the night, So kudos to Penn State, honestly. Thought they had a hell of a game plan on offense. It's, obviously, I would have liked to see the Oregon defense step up a little bit more, but at the same time, you got to give flowers where the flowers are due. And I think Penn State came out with a pretty solid game plan.
For sure. And going up against possible two NFL running backs, a very good offensive line, and a first or second round tied in going to the NFL draft soon. I think they kind of held their own. But listen, the competition's going to ramp up. It's going to get harder. These teams get better as you go into the playoff. You got the bye. How's it feel to have the 3-week bye? Get some guys rested up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think anytime you can get a couple of weeks off and get some guys healthy at the end of the season, it bodes well. But then you kind of walk into that uncharted territory of how long is too long of a break?
Yeah.
You can practice these situations in the high intensity in practice, and I think Dan does a phenomenal job of doing that at Oregon, keeping these guys ready to go, whether it's a Monday during a bye week or whether it's a Thursday night before a big Saturday game. So I don't necessarily worry about it too much, but at the same time, that's a lot of sitting time that the Ducks are going to be doing here, kind of away from gameplay. But I'm really glad that they're finally going to be able to get healthy. I think guys like Jaleel Florence, who are close to coming back, who was a starting corner for Oregon last year, I think that it'll be almost ensure that he's ready for the playoffs.
Tez.
Marcus Harper is someone who was able to play. Yep, Tez is another one with a shoulder injury. I think people last night they're kind of talking about he played very similar to like a Tyler Lockett when he got the ball and he'd kind of fall down right away and not take those big hits. And I think a lot of what that is just kind of managing the contact, mitigating the risk of him coming off an injury, knowing that you have playoff games to play,
Yeah.
not taking the big shots like that. But guys like Tez to heal up, guys like a Marcus Harper to heal up, Oregon, you're going to take these bumps and bruises throughout the year. And I think a lot of them aren't necessarily going to show up on the injury report, but I don't think there's a man in that locker room who's firing at
I, I
100% right now.
I know, I know the two running backs, Whittington and James. After last night, they are thankful for a couple weeks off because they've just been just used and abused like workhorses, and it's going to be nice to have a couple weeks off for them. But guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We'll have a couple videos a week for you until the big game. We'll do a a pregame show and then a post game show of the first playoff game ever um, in this 12-team playoff. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to hang out with you guys and talk about it. It should be a good one for the Ducks. And just to watch this format play out. I think we got a lot of the right teams. I know there's some teams crying because they didn't make it in, but that's you gotta win the games, right? 13-0, they ain't getting left out.
100%. Dan said it best in his interview this week. He said, "There's one thing you can do to put zero doubt in the mind of the committee," and he said, "Just win."
Yep.
What did he say? I think his quote was, "If you lose 3 games, shame on you." And I think, it might be a little shot back in Alabama, but what can you do?
Yeah. All right, guys. We will go ahead and see you later. I want to thank our proud sponsor, BetUS. Go ahead, check them out, betus.com. I am Cody the Professor. We got Derek the Duck, and we are out.